Welcome, everybody, to the Marketing Phoenix podcast. I'm Melissa Rogozinski, and I am so excited to have y'all here with me. And I am blessed and a little bit of starstruck to have the famous Steve Embry with me for today's conversation. We're going to be talking about messaging that reflects their business, not yours, because a lot of legal tech, we've seen so much movement in legal tech, in the last few years. Lots of money's being invested. It just seems like every day we've got 10 new legal tech startups, hanging their shingle, and we're super excited. And you've got a community of veterans here who we love this industry. We want to see you succeed. We want to get you connected, but there's some problems, and a lot of legal tech startups and scale-ups are really missing the mark. And so it's not about you. I know you don't want to hear that, but it's not. And Steve and I are going to talk about how to help you reframe your messaging and really understand your prospects and help you grow your business. So with that, Steve, will you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, just in case there's actually a single person in this industry who doesn't know who you are?
I don't know about that, but I practiced law with a AmLaw probably 200 firm for about 30 plus years. I did mass tort defense work. About 8 years ago, I retired from the firm and started a blog, TechLaw Crossroads, which is about legal innovation and legal technology. I still have that blog, but I'm also write for Above the Law quite frequently on legal issues, legal technology issues. I attend lots of conferences. In fact, I'm at a user conference as we speak today. So I try to keep up with what's going on in the industry. Although, as you recognized a minute ago, that's hard to do these days because there's a lot of water coming out of that fire hose. So I typically focus on litigation related technology, just because that's what I know more than contract management and those kinds of things. Although many of the tools that are out there work for various and sundry things. So that's the very short and concise summary.
So, if you don't mind, we prepared, like I always do, some questions, and I'm going to be looking back and forth to make sure we go through these. But before that, let me just punt this to you. Steve, you attend every single legal tech conference there is to attend. And I also focus on litigation as well, because that's what I knew as a paralegal. What's the biggest problem you're seeing with the startups and scale-ups really connecting with their prospects and converting them into buyers?
Yeah. Let me start with the story about that. And I think it's pretty instructive, at least in my mind. About a year and a half ago, there was a startup that came on the scene. Typically, what startups do is they have a big announcement, a press release, invite everybody in, media in for a demonstration. They go to conferences, have a big booth, and do a lot of marketing. But this particular startup didn't do any of that. They wanted to focus on big law and get there. It's an AI tool. And so first thing they did is they went out and hired a lawyer who had been with a big law firm, not me, for many years, and sat down and talked about what they needed to do. And the thing that they came up with was, law firms are funny in a lot of ways, but one way when it comes to marketing, they're funny is one of the first questions they'll always ask a vendor is, who else has bought this product? And so what this startup did is said, let's find a law firm, one law firm. We can just find one law firm that we can get our foot in the door and do a pilot project with. And we'll phrase it as a pilot project, not buying our product, but a pilot project, developmental project. So they found one law firm to do that. Big law firm, lots of name recognition. And from that pilot program, they then convinced the law firm to buy their product because it was a good product. Still no media announcement, still under the radar with everybody. After they got the one law firm convinced to buy the product, they went to a second law firm, another big law firm, very well-known law firm, convinced it to buy the product. And then they went to an accounting firm with these two name recognitions in their quiver and convinced a big four accounting firm to buy their product. Within a year, that became a multi-million-dollar company, and the name of the company is Harvey. And that's how they did it. And that's, to me, that's very instructive about how to build a business with legal. They recognize the needs and importance of tailoring their product and their marketing to what resonated with the business, a big law firm. And from that, they were able to create this very successful company. What I see happen a lot is startups don't understand the way law firms work. They don't understand the way lawyers work and their needs, and they just push something out there without thinking a whole lot about where does it fit, who are we marketing it to, and who makes the decisions within the law firm. And those are of fundamental importance, and there's too often assumptions made that are incorrect.
So, in your experience, what are some of the mistakes that vendors are making in their messaging when they're trying to sell to modern buyers today?
Yeah. Well, one of the first places they go wrong is you have to understand how segmented the legal marketplace is. The needs and technology stack of an AmLaw 100 firm are completely different than a 10-person law firm. Mm-hmm. The client mix of a law firm changes their needs considerably. And then, of course, you got completely different business models between firms that operate on a billable hour business model and firms that operate on a contingency fee model. That's not even selling to automobile manufacturing companies that may have different cars. That's selling to completely different businesses. And a lot of times these startups don't understand that, and they try to create messages that don't fit within the needs of the client and the type of business that the client or the prospect is running. So that's the first problem that I see. The second problem is, if you're particularly with respect to larger law firms, they don't understand how the decision-making flow works. Larger law firms, you've got people from those firms go to conferences, and messages are tailored at those conferences, sales pitches. But the people that go to the conferences are not the lawyers. They're IT personnel. They are computer nerds like the vendor computer nerds. And so these people start talking to each other, which is great because, in many respects, to get your foot in the door, you have to sort of convince an IT person. But they don't then give the IT person the right language and message to take back to the lawyers and the legal professionals that actually make the decision within the law firm. So it ends up sounding like gobbledygook to the lawyers who you're trying to convince to buy the product. They're going, what are you talking about? We don't even understand what you're talking about. And I think that's a big problem that often goes unaddressed. And, let's face it, I mean, the business model, business structure of most law firms is very consensus oriented. It's not like a company where you can walk in and convince, the CFO to hire financial software and the CFO makes the decision. I mean, with a law firm, it's like several different layers. There's the IT person, then you go to the technology committee, then you go to the executive committee, and then you go to the partnership as a whole. All along their way, there's slightly different language that needs to be used and different messaging that needs to be used in order to persuade the would-be buyer of the product. Lawyers, at least, as you know, particularly on the litigation side, we are used to persuading and being persuaded by evidence. And so we tend to have very low tolerance of BS. If you want to sell me a product, show me, give me evidence how the product works, and more importantly, what it does for me, and persuade me with evidence, not slogans and marketing jargon pitches.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you saying that, because I think, and that's how I manage my business. That's how I manage my personal life. Like anything that comes out of my mouth, or especially if I put it in writing, I have evidence to back it up. And
Right.
not even like I'm not intentionally thinking that way. I'm trained after 30 years. I'm trained to think that way because I was a paralegal first.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we don't, as I say, we just don't have much tolerance for BS because, particularly as litigators, we're used to ferreting out BS. And we sort of know it when we hear it, and we know it when we see it, because that's our training, that's our job.
And we can see holes.
Yeah, right. And another thing that I think happens a lot, that I think vendors sometimes don't appreciate in the consumer technology space, it's perfectly acceptable and expected for you to make a press announcement and talk about this wonderful product that's going to be available in beta in 2 months, we hope, and then it'll actually be launched third quarter next year, we hope. That doesn't resonate with lawyers very well, because that's like, yeah, right, okay, come back and see me when you got something, would you? And it's a frustrating mistake because it's made over and over. And accompanying that often is this sort of, we've got a big new enhancement to our product, come and see what it is. And you go and see what it is, and you walk out and you go, that's not very big. I mean, like, that's all it does. And not only is that frustrating, but it immediately puts doubt in your mind about just how much of this is really credible, of anything they're saying. If you tell me a little untruth here, the rest of it may be untrue too. So it really undermines their credibility, I think, when they do both of those things.
You brought something up earlier too about the different size of law firms, and I've seen this my entire career. As soon as someone tries to enter a market, everyone goes after the AmLaws. They go after the
Right.
AmLaws, and they go after corporate legal. And some of the comments I've heard from other veterans in our industry, and I want to hear your piece on this. AmLaws are tapped out. They're interested, but they're tapped out. Like, they're AmLaws because they've already made those decisions. They've already built their tech stacks. They've got their process. They've got their workflows. Judge Shinlin was on a panel back at Legal Tech, I think when we were still calling it Legal Tech, with all the big e-discovery judges when all of that started, becoming what it was 15, 20 years ago. And she made a comment that you're missing 80% of the market. 80% of the lawyers are in the small to mid-size law firms that are 10 to under 100. And,
Right.
And I'm just now starting to see a trickle of interest in small to mid-size markets. That's my background. I was raised in Alabama. That's where I built the majority of my career. I've been in South Florida for the last 9 years now. But am I wrong? Like, I'm trying to, tap the waters and let everybody know, if you want to grow your revenue, like, start focusing on the small to mid-sized market. 80% of the entire industry is sitting there, and they're not at these conferences you're going to. You need to meet them where they are, at their local bar association events, at their state bar annual events. You need to be seeing how the state laws are being amended regarding technology and what their obligations are there. What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It is a huge marketplace. They have different needs than the AmLaw 100 firms. For one thing, I mean, they have to be much more cost focused, out of economies of scale, and you have to appreciate, particularly with smaller or mid-sized firms, uh, in persuading them to buy something, you really have to think about the cost, because with a small mid-sized firm, you got 20 partners in a law firm. That your cost for your product is going to be spread across 20 partners, as opposed to an AmLaw 100 firm where that might be 500 partners. So that makes a big difference if you're talking about reducing my draw by X amount, and you're spreading it on such a limited number of people that persuading becomes different in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a big market, and it is a market that they need, and they appreciate that they need tools to enable them to better compete with the big law firms who have all these, particularly now in the age of AI, have all these artificial intelligence tools to do all these things that are quite remarkable, but they're also expensive, at least if you use the private-facing tools. So that is an important area to small and mid-sized firms. And the other thing that I think is important to realize is when you get into the smaller firms, they do more contingency fee work, as I alluded to before. With contingency fee work, getting something done efficiently and faster makes you more money,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a billable hour business model where doing things efficiently and faster makes you less money. Now, that doesn't mean that you cut corner or don't, or that doesn't mean you overbill, but it does mean that it's a different focus. And so selling products to that kind of law firm that has contingency fee cases should be much easier when it comes to reducing time spent on substantive legal matters. So there's a big marketplace there, and it's ignored because most startups look at the field and say, "Oh, the money's in big law. They got more money. They got they got more people to spread it across. They've got more needs, and so that's the place to go." But it's a much harder market to crack, perhaps, than the smaller firms because, as you say, they've got their tech stack. They've used, Westlaw, for example, for years. So you're going to have to persuade them not to use Westlaw in a area that a lot of firms do use that tool, and it's a well-recognized tool. And so you got a lot of hurdles to jump over to get through that. So yeah, I agree with you that it's a big market, and it's a market that's undersold in a lot of ways.
You brought up two things too that I think is really important for messaging, in that selling to the small to mid-sized market allows them to be more competitive with AmLaw. All right. So that's how one way you can reframe your messaging. The other way is back off of telling them you're going to save them time. That's not what billable attorneys want to hear.
Right.
You have to reframe that as, say, yes, it's going to make you more efficient. And that's actually what ethics laws say now. You have a duty to the client to, leverage these kinds of tools, but that creates stickiness with your existing clients and makes you more attractive to your prospects if you can show those efficiencies. And if you can reframe it that way, then now you're helping the law firm to see that you're making them more efficient and profitable.
Yeah. It's in a couple of points I would raise there. One is client. If you look at a lot of the survey data, clients, particularly business clients, are more and more interested in alternative fee arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
And just like a contingency fee arrangement, you make more money off of a flat fee arrangement by reducing the time you spend on it. So that's an important point, I think, to recognize. Clients want that, and they're probably going to demand those efficiencies. The other thing to think about is there's a principle called Jevons principle, and the basic of the principle is you lower the price, you get more business because more people buy the product. There's a school of thought, and I think there's a lot to it in the legal marketplace, that by using a lot of these efficiency tools, generative AI and the like, automation and the like, you can reduce the cost of your service that you provide and bring in more service that's being underserved. You don't have to look very far to realize that small businesses, individuals with legal needs, they don't go hire a lawyer because it's too expensive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I see this a lot, particularly with people who want a divorce, who are in unhappy marriages, for example. They want out, but either they have to do it themselves or they have to hire a lawyer, and they're not poor, they're not destitute, but a $5,000 retainer to hire a lawyer,
And then it's
that's a
gone
tough.
like that. I
Then
did.
it's
I
gone.
was did tax work in the very first part of my career 30 years ago, and it can escalate into the tens of thousands of dollars
Yeah,
and hundreds of thousands just to get a divorce.
yeah. So the point is, in selling products that reduce billable hours, it's important to make the point that there is this body of work out there that you can get if you lower your price and
Mhm.
use these tools to do the work. So, I mean, part of the problem was, particularly with plaintiffs' lawyers, there are a lot of cases plaintiffs' lawyers won't take, not because the case is invalid. It's a valid case, it's a valid claim, but because the damages are not such that you can make any money on it. But
Mhm.
the time you spend on getting the result overtakes the value of what you could achieve. But if you start using a lot of these efficiency tools, then it becomes possible to take some of those cases. And in fact, we're seeing an uptick in litigation across the board. And I think part of it is because there are cases now being filed that couldn't be filed before because of the cost, efficiency, and recovery sort of mismatch. So those are valid areas to market in, and I think valid pitches that would resonate with a lot of law firms, particularly in a small to mid-sized market.
That is a great place to segue into the next question. How have legal practitioners changed their methods of buying such that vendors need to reframe their messaging? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know that they have changed all that much. Important things. Well, again, you have to sort of segment your market and realize who you're talking to, you're pitching to. But let's say you're pitching to lawyers themselves. Um, Vendors sometimes they don't appreciate that every minute I spend listening to a sales pitch, every minute I spend trying to understand how to use your product, every minute I spend trying to use your product and it not working, I'm losing money. It's like you're sucking revenue right out of my pocket. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so it's always sort of amazed me that vendors come out with products that are not easy to use because they don't understand the importance of that. I used to walk through exhibit halls, and you may have done the same. And you'll see the people demoing products, and they say click here, and then you click here. And by that point, I'm saying 3 clicks, and I'm gone. But I'm sorry, you're not. That's not going to work. You're not going to get. Oh, well, you're billing by the hour to click 3 times because they'll go do it on their own. Um, so I don't know that has changed. I think that's still true. Lawyers, a lot of times it's said that we're really behind on technology. That's not necessarily true because you look at a lot of law firms have very sophisticated technology for back office practice management tool kind of stuff because they make money there. Being efficient there, they make more money. They tend to drag their feet a little bit on the billable hour on the substantive side, tools that help them reduce time because yes, it affects their profitability, but B, it's sort of what clients expect. One reason that we have the billable hour model is particularly on very large cases. If you're a sophisticated client, you really want your lawyers to leave no stone unturned on
Mm-hmm.
those cases. So if you pay them by the hour, that sort of guarantees that, right? So that's how we have the billable hours. So I think the change that is occurring and is going to occur, particularly where we have in-house counsel, is they're going to start demanding that their lawyers be more efficient. You you're not going to change the industry relying upon law firms. What's the old saying? It's hard to tell a room full of millionaires their business model is all wrong. So that they're not going to change, but when the clients demand it, they're going to change. On the smaller matters, the smaller businesses and individuals, I think the change that's going to occur is those clients are going to have much more information. They're going to go to Chat GPT and say, how long should it take my lawyer to draft a will? And then, when they go see the lawyer to draft the will and the lawyer gives them a bill for 25 hours, they're going to say, it shouldn't have taken you 25 hours. It should have taken you 10. And I've got data to show it. So that's a change. And so all of those are going to change sort of the dynamics and interest, I think, in technology, not because law firms necessarily want to, but because they're going to have to. Their clients are going to demand that they do that.
So let's talk about positioning and personas a little bit. You shared an example when we started about Harvey and how they did it right. Because Harvey has absolutely been the topic du jour of legal AI. And there's all these questions about how they did what they did and became what they have in such a short amount of time. So, but can you share an example of messaging that failed from a legal tech vendor because they didn't adapt?
Oh, I'd have to think about that a little bit. I think that the examples are pretty numerous, and you always hate to
And no name dropping. You don't have to do that.
no name dropping, but there have been instances where vendors tout a product and it keeps rolling into the future. I know one vendor, for example, that used to make numerous presentations at shows about their great product, but it never was quite ready for prime time. It never got where people could actually use it. It was great to talk about. And this is, this is what it's going to do. This is what it's going to do. It's going to revolutionize this. It's going to change all that. And at some point, you got to have something. Right? You have something that really works and people can use. And that, but before long, buyers lose interest and lose interest pretty quick. The other thing, I think people, at least when generative AI first took off, I think a lot of vendors didn't appreciate and sort of scoffed at the idea that lawyers live in a profession where accuracy is critical. It's demanded. I mean, we can't be wrong.
Right.
And we're going to have some error rates no matter what, but it's very important that the product work, that it be correct, and that it work every single time. If it doesn't, then it's not that we're personally upset by that. We're upset because we have to have that. We can't make those kinds of mistakes. We can't take hallucinated cases and expect that, oh, that's just too bad. Tut tut. We cite a case wrong, we're in trouble. We give wrong advice, we're in trouble. Not only lose clients, but we could be sued for malpractice. So it's sort of like a surgeon. We can't. You're going to have open heart surgery. Your surgeon better know what he or she is doing, and it better be right, because the consequences of not can be catastrophic, and that drives us, makes us skeptical of vendors that produce products that aren't right, aren't accurate, and aren't accurate most of the time, or 90% of the time. So that's a fundamental, fault I see a lot of vendors make.
That what you just said is going to feed into a couple other questions we're going to cover. So let's take the direction into content. So content, buzzwords. We'll address buzzwords in a minute, but so let's talk about content. How can content, marketing content, the sales messaging, you've seen it all, Steve. How can content really help build trust and authority when you're trying to speak to prospects, even getting their attention, much less being able to start taking them through the sales discovery journey.
Yeah. I think if I were going to advise a startup on that question, I would say, go talk to an experienced lawyer. Understand what they want. Understand what resonates with them. You probably will be surprised by what you hear. Go talk to a lawyer in the market segment that you're pitching to, so you understand what they're looking for, what they want, what they need. Don't assume that you're going to market a product like you're marketing in a consumer marketplace. It's completely different. So I think in terms of content, that's the first thing I would do, because content is going to resonate differently with the segment that you're pitching to. There's not one size fits all, which is another mistake I see vendors sometimes make. They think, create a marketing platform and pitch it to everybody and it'll be just fine. It won't, because they're different businesses. So that's kind of where I would start with content. And keep in mind, as we discussed before, you'd have to make your case to a lawyer and to a law firm. Evidence-based marketing, content that doesn't focus on buzzwords, but focuses on evidence, and evidence that can be credible. There's tons of surveys out there about tons of stuff. But lots of those surveys are done by vendors. And the first thing that I think when I read those surveys, and I read a lot of them, is, okay, what is this vendor selling? And is that impacting the survey results? Because we all know how you ask a question and what question you ask can impact the response that you get. So keep in mind, for survey purposes, if I'm a vendor and I want to use survey data, get it from a credible source, and don't show me your survey. That's fine. I mean, that's helpful, but I'd much rather see an industry survey, a ABA survey, or an ILTA survey, somebody that's got some, credibility and is not necessarily pitching a product that's sort of undermining, consciously or unconsciously, affecting the results of what they're reporting in their survey. So, it's all very, again, evidence-based. Make your case.
And keep your ear to the ground. Like every quarter, update your content strategy and,
Right.
Look at what are the headlines from the talking heads. Like, you're one of the talking heads. You're in a group of legal tech reporters that y'all are kind of that group to follow. Follow these people. Pay attention to the agendas of the conferences that are coming up. What's on the agenda? Who are the speakers? And iterate and talk to your prospects. Do these, occasionally, and iterate your content strategy every 3 months, and make sure that marketing and sales are in the room together when you're having these conversations about what your content strategy is going to look like and how you're going to iterate every 3 months. Because sales brings marketing, doing a lot of research, but sales is the one that's in front of the prospects. They're the ones having the conversations. Record those conversations, digest them. I have a 9-point prompt for my meetings, my sales meetings, that I go through to help me, identify the things that are important so I can follow up with that. Sales are the only ones who are actually talking to the prospects and hearing what they're talking about. So they can bring that to the table in those quarterly meetings with marketing and, constantly iterate their strategy according to that. And then when marketing produces those, sales can use those deliverables in their, follow-up meetings through the discovery process, through deal closing, and that kind of tees up where I want to go next. So I want to take this messaging into product. So we've talked about marketing, we've talked about sales. So,
but before you do that, let me add one thing to what you just said that I think is important. I used to have a client who was fond of saying, let's be careful we don't get in the closet and talk to ourselves too much. A lot of vendors will focus on the big tech shows. I think it's important to go to lawyer conferences where the lawyers are. I'm in an industry trial lawyers association that meets twice a year, and this past time I almost didn't go to the meeting because it was inconvenient, it was costly, and I was telling one of my friends about this, and she said, "Well, wait a minute, don't you write about legal technology?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And she said, "Well, shouldn't you be at a conference where you hear what the lawyers are saying in addition to what the technology people?" I said, "Yeah, that's really true." So going to the conference, I learned a lot of stuff about what they are talking about, what they're concerned about, what they're upset about. Um, so yeah, I mean, it could be expensive for a vendor to get the foot in the door at a lawyers conference. I mean, you probably have to be a sponsor or an exhibitor, but getting that information is critical. It's the real stuff. It's not filtered through an IT person or a marketing person. I mean, it's like you're sitting at the foot.
The mouth of the horse itself.
Yeah, right. Exactly right. So anyway, just wanted to add that while we were on that topic.
No, I'm glad you did. I mentioned that earlier too, and I keep talking about that to like prospects and clients. Like, I hear what you're doing, but why do you want to be at legal tech conferences? Why do you want to be at Legal Week? Why do you want to be ABA, ILTA, the Legal Tech Fund Summit? I get that, but you need to be at the State Bar Association events. You need to be at the Miami-Dade County, the Birmingham Bar Association. You need to be at those because that's where your buyers are. Your buyers
Right.
are at the national conferences.
Yeah, that's right. And when you go to those conferences, don't just sit behind your booth and sit there. I mean, if somebody walks up to you, so you're sitting in a booth, I'm going to avoid you because I know you're going to try to pitch sales, have a sales pitch,
Mhm.
But if I bump into somebody at a cocktail party and we start a conversation, you're apt to learn a lot more stuff than you would just sitting in your booth waiting for somebody to come by. And when they do, they don't want to they just want to get the swag and get out of there.
Let me share a story with you real quick. So I've been an entrepreneur in legal tech for 13 years, almost by accident. It started 15 years ago because I was selling court reporting, video trial, and e-discovery 15 years ago. I was in Alabama, and the Alabama Defense Lawyers Association had their fall conference, which was smaller than their annual conference in the summer. And there were like maybe 5 vendors there. And it was on Amelia Island in Georgia. Like, it was small. But we went, set up a booth, and Alabama was in the process. I guess it had to have been 2008. The state of Alabama had put the rules committee together. Federal rules had been amended in 06, I think, on e-discovery. The Zubelik case happened in 05. Federal rules were amended in 06. Alabama, this defense lawyers conference was in 08. They had put their rules committee together to start working on Alabama's rules about e-discovery. So I'm at this conference, 2-day conference, and the very last session was a 3 judges panel. And they were presiding judges of the biggest counties in Alabama. And there were about 60, 65 lawyers in the room, and the judges are all the way in front. I'm a vendor. And even though I've been a paralegal, I still had to earn their trust because now I was a vendor. I went into that last session and I sat in the very back row next to a couple attorneys I know just to listen. Like you were saying, I just wanted to listen what they were talking about. What is their pain? What are they concerned about? Because I need to know, because next week I'll be in their offices trying to earn their business, right? And a question came up towards the end of the session about cost sharing between plaintiffs, contingency firms, and defense lawyers who have big budgets on cost sharing of e-discovery. Crickets. No one in the room had an answer. The attorney sitting next to me, his name was Dudley Motlow. He leans over and he's like, "Rogo, you need to say something." And I was like, "I can't, I'm a vendor." And I'm not a lawyer. And he said, "Yeah, but everybody knows you. Go ahead and, say something." I said, "I'm in the back. And, this is 15 years ago. I'm less confident then than I am now." And I raised my hand, and Judge Vowell, who was presiding judge of Jefferson County, where 50% of the litigation gets filed, he calls on me. So I stand up, introduce myself, who I'm working for, and I said, I'm an account rep. I'm a vendor, but and I'm not trying to sell anything, but I have an answer. And he looked at me from across the room front, right? He's like, if you have an answer to this question, you sell anything you want to. I've got your back. So I answered the question about cost sharing. I said, here's what we're talking about in our spaces, right? And that was it. It was over.
That's great. Yeah.
And I walked out to go back to the booth, and I get this just, massive swarm of lawyers and judges, and the judges make their way up. Everyone wants to talk to me. And so I told Judge Val, I said, look, here's, we do educational programs with the company I work for. They're good. We're not pitching, they're CLE, but here's the challenges I face with competitors that sell other products, not e-discovery. And, I need some help. And he looked at me and he said, Melissa, you put a group together and let them know I'm involved and I will help you educate Birmingham. Mm-hmm. 1 year later, I contacted him and I said, all right, here's the conversations at the time. And that was November of 2009. We put together a breakfast of lawyers and judges from the community. And that's where the ESI Roundtable was born. And that was my first business. And that took off. I lost count after 300 programs in 9 cities, did it organically. And that's what catapulted the second phase of my entrepreneurial journey with RPC Strategies.
That's such a great story on a couple of levels. One, the importance of listening. I mean, and we're all guilty of talking and not listening too much, and particularly in this space, it's so important. The other thing interesting about the story is it confirms a couple of things that we said before, and that is having somebody who is not a vendor, who is recognized in the area, whose name attaches to what you're selling is just so critical. You had the judge, you could say judge, so whatever his name was, the judge thinks this is a good idea. And I mean, that is such a powerful piece of evidence to lawyers who are very sort of, name recognition is important to them anyway, but because that's evidence, and that's the best evidence, right? Because it's not something that you blah, 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 blah. It's something somebody trustworthy and credible says. And that should be your goal.
So let's talk.
Thanks for the story.
I'm not sure that you knew that story, but that's how I got started, this accidental.
I did not.
And so let's take that. So we've been talking for about 40 minutes now about all this messaging, right? And getting that right. So let's talk about product. We've talked about marketing. We talked about sales. How can sales and marketing teams reframe their messaging so that it emphasizes outcomes for the clients rather than the features and benefits? Because you can talk about your features and benefits, but not yet.
Right. So the starting point is, again, to listen and find what's a pain point. And I'll give you an example. The user conference where I am, they have introduced a tool that automates the scheduling of a deposition and the notice of a deposition. That doesn't sound like much, but when I'm reflecting on that back when I was practicing law, that was a royal pain in the ass to do that stuff. You got to prepare the notice, you got to put it on the calendar, you got to call the court.
That was my job, not yours.
But it was a pain. It's a pain point, and this vendor identified it and set out to fix it, and that's the starting point. Is don't tell me all the features of your product. Show me a pain point that it helps address. That's what I want. I want to see it, and I want it to be a real pain point. Don't just make one up. Like, it'd be easy for to say, oh yeah, that's really hard for you guys to do that. So we have a tool that will do a table of contents for you automatically, right? Well, there are already tools that do that, so that's a bad place to start to begin with. But so it's not a pain point, but find a real pain point and show how you can address it. That's the start, and it may even be the end, the beginning and the end, because that's to me that's that's all there is to marketing to lawyers, is find the pain point and fixing it, and make it an easy thing to fix and make it easy to use. If you do that, then people will buy the product.
But to what you were saying about scheduling depositions, I know I kind of razzed you a little bit, but when I started selling court reporting, and my manager pulled a CD out of the transcript and popped it into the computer to show me how to demo it, and I was like, "Hold on, what do you mean there's a CD in the back of that transcript?" And I was like, "No one ever showed me this." And I said, "Do you actually understand what I do as a paralegal? Do you understand what my attorney's doing? Do you understand why we take depositions, how we choose the witnesses to depose, how we prepare, all that goes into preparing, sending the lawyer into to take the deposition, and what we're doing afterward, and why that's so important? Do you understand what this technology could do in order to save us time in every area of this function?" And now you're saying, and do you understand why it's important? Because you're saving me time, because at the end of the month, sometimes the clients won't pay for everything. So we have to write down our time. We've spent that time and now we've lost it. But if you have a technology that can show me how to be more efficient, that allows me to use that time for other things that I can charge for. And now you're driving revenue. You're making me more profitable.
Right. I think that's right. And, I will give you another example. And I say this because just as vendors are selling to us, we're selling to clients, right? So there is some symmetry between what each of us are doing, which is kind of important to think about as a vendor. I have to get clients, I have to persuade clients to hire me. But one of the things that's a real pain point for me, and maybe for other lawyers as well, is creating a PowerPoint. I mean, it's just a pain, I mean, I don't like doing it, and I don't do it very well. I was asked to give a presentation at a lawyer's retreat on how to use generative AI large language models, and I sat down to prepare my PowerPoint, my sales pitch, if you will, because that's what kind of PowerPoints are. And I'm kind of scratching my head, and I thought, I bet ChatGPT could help me. And so I started it, and it produced 2 or 3 slides. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. I'm doing this all wrong. Rather than me creating a PowerPoint to show to these lawyers, I'm going to take the tool in the room and have the tool show the lawyers, and it can do it, and how it can do it, which was a much more effective way, I think, of selling what I was trying to sell, and that is that you should use ChatGPT for a lot of these kinds of tasks. So yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to that's a pain point, and can address the pain point and think about ways to address it, and then demonstrate how it's doing, how it does that.
We touched on something earlier about using generic terms and buzzwords, and I saw a post this morning using a bunch of technical jargon, buzzwords, and then claiming, like you were talking about survey results earlier, and claiming that they're the first one that can do X. And someone I respected commented on it. That's why I saw it on my feed. But I responded. I was like, well, wait a minute. ChatGPT does this when I set up a project and an instruction. So why are you claiming to be the first? And I'm reading it. I'm thinking, which of your buyers is going to read this and understand, excuse my language, what in the hell are you talking about?
Right.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about using generic terms and buzzwords instead of the language that your buyers use. What's the problem with that?
Well, I see it all the time. Put it in in terms that maybe are very understandable for lawyers that might be listening. When you have a client come in your office and you're explaining a legal concept to them, if you use buzzwords and jargon, they're going to have no idea what you're talking about. And the immediate impact of that is they quit listening, A, and B, the trust erodes. I mean, I don't trust you because I don't know what you're talking about. There's an old saying, I can't remember who said it, but the saying is, if if you can't explain something to me to make me understand what you're talking about, you either don't know what you're talking about yourself or you're hiding something. And I think that is an important thing to remember when talking about using buzzwords. I get pitches every now and then from people, and if I don't understand them, sometimes I think, boy, I'm being dumb for not understanding them. And then I'm thinking, no, I'm not dumb. They're just not explaining it in a way that is understandable. Um, and, if you can't explain it to me, because I'm fairly knowledgeable in the field, if I don't understand what you're talking about when it comes to technology, how in the world are somebody that doesn't keep up with this stuff, your buyer, going to be able to do that? Um, when I was a lawyer, bigger cases, we would always use mock jury and jury research to find out how our arguments were resonating with people. In smaller cases, sometimes we'd just get a group of people who worked in the office who were not lawyers, who didn't have legal knowledge, and explain the case to see if what we were saying they understood. And they would often say, we don't get that. What are you trying to say? So doing those kinds of things, I think, is important, so you don't fall into the trap. It's easy to fall into the trap of jargon. Particularly if you're talking to somebody that's semi in the same area, you get to yakking, and before long you're speaking in language that somebody listening to you doesn't understand. And it kind of goes back to something I said earlier. But you go to these conferences and you see vendors pitching to IT people, but they forget that the IT person then has to go and pitch to the lawyer. So they need to give them not only the jargon version, but the simple version of what they're saying, so that can be used when the IT person has to go back and explain what this grandiose, super duper product really does. So, and we have little tolerance for buzzwords, so.
No, and I completely agree. I'm really enjoying this conversation. But we are coming up on our time. So, and I know that you're at a conference you need to run. So last question, Steve. What are some of your best tips for legal tech startups and scale ups on getting their messaging right to be able to engage the prospects and convert them into buyers and clients?
My number one advice and tip would be talk to lawyers and listen to what they have to say. Don't make it a sales conversation. Make it a substantive conversation about what they do and how they do it and what their business model is and what their client mix is and who they serve and what they're upset about or frustrated by, or what they think about technology in general. It's just, you'd be amazed at some of the things you hear when you just ask, what do you think about this particular technology? I was talking to a lawyer the other day, and we were talking about hallucinations, and he said, I understand that we're supposed to read every case so we don't cite a hallucinated case, but gosh, sometimes I'm a local counsel and I get a brief from national counsel that's got 100 citations in it, and I get the brief 2 hours before the filing deadline. What am I supposed to do? That's important information that I wouldn't get if I didn't go to conferences and talk to lawyers and sort of understand what they say. So I would strongly recommend that. And, talk about your product or talk about technology and see what the reaction is. If you get a what reaction, what you just said is gobbledygook. Reframe it so people can understand it. And that's the key, I think, to really marketing your product well.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Steve, so much for joining me.
Thank you.
I know we know each other, but I am a little starstruck with you. So
I think the same is true on my end. You're pretty famous yourself. So
I miss you. I can't wait to see you again. Thank you so much for joining me and helping to put this message out there. I love this industry. I love these vendors. I love lawyers. I love paralegals. I am with you. I want to help everybody be successful with these tools. But you got to get your message right.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. And one final comment that I would make, particularly for trial lawyers and litigators, like we're really interesting people because we're storytellers, and we telling an effective story is probably critical to marketing your product. That's how that resonates with people. That's how we remember things. So, but thank you for having me, and I hope I get to see you again in person, before too long. I know we used to bump into each other at some of these conferences, so maybe we will soon get to do that again.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Right.
everybody, for joining Steve and I on the Marketing Phoenix podcast. And be sure to follow and subscribe. And we'll see y'all at the next one.